The heart monitor suddenly went flat. A long, piercing sound filled the emergency room. For a moment, the entire room froze in shocked silence. Doctors stopped moving, nurses stared at the screen, even the air felt heavy. Dr. Harris slowly removed his gloves and looked at the clock on the wall. "Time of death, 9:42 p.m., he said quietly. The words fell like a heavy weight in the room. A young nurse lowered her head. Another doctor sighed and stepped away from the bed. They had done everything they could, but the patient lying on the hospital bed was only 22 years old. Daniel Carter. Just an hour earlier, he had walked into the hospital holding his chest, breathing heavily. His mother had been beside him, terrified. "Please help my son," she had begged. Doctors rushed Daniel into the emergency room immediately. Machines were attached, medications were given, CPR was performed. For 40 long minutes, the medical team fought to save him. But now, the machines showed nothing. No heartbeat, no pulse, nothing. Doctors began cleaning up the equipment. A nurse quietly removed an IV line. Another nurse slowly covered part of Daniel's body with a white sheet. But one person in the room refused to move. Nurse Elena stood beside the bed, staring at Daniel's still face. Her hands trembled slightly. Elena had been a nurse for 8 years. She had seen many difficult nights in the hospital. She had seen people survive, and she had seen people die. But something about this moment felt wrong, very wrong. Dr. Harris noticed Elena still standing there. "It's over, Elena," he said firmly. Elena didn't answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the patient. Daniel's face looked pale, but peaceful. Too peaceful. Her heart began to beat faster. She leaned slightly closer to the bed. "Daniel," she whispered softly. No response. The heart monitor remained silent. Another nurse gently placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "Elena, come on," she said kindly. "We did everything we could." Elena slowly nodded. But inside her chest, something felt unsettled. She had learned something important during her years as a nurse. Machines could be wrong, doctors could be wrong, but sometimes instinct was powerful, very powerful. She looked again at the flat monitor, then at Daniel's chest. Was it her imagination, or had it moved? Just a little. Elena's breathing slowed. She leaned closer again, watching carefully. Nothing. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe grief was playing tricks on her mind. Dr. Harris began walking toward the door. "Notify the family," he told another nurse. The nurse nodded sadly. Daniel's mother was sitting outside in the waiting room. She had been crying for nearly an hour. Elena remembered her voice. "Please save him. He's all I have," the woman had begged earlier. The memory made Elena's chest tighten. She looked at Daniel again. His hand rested near the edge of the bed, still, silent. But then, something tiny happened, so small it could easily be missed. Daniel's finger twitched, just slightly. Elena's eyes widened instantly. Her breath caught in her throat. "Wait," she whispered. She stared at his hand. It was still again. Maybe it was just a muscle reflex. That sometimes happened after death. But something inside Elena refused to accept it. She leaned even closer now, her heart pounding loudly in her chest. "Daniel, can you hear me?" she asked softly. No response. The machines remained silent. But then, his chest moved, barely noticeable, just the faintest rise. Elena stepped back quickly. "Did you see that?" she asked suddenly. But the other nurses had already begun leaving the room. One of them looked back briefly. "See what?" she asked, confused. "I think he moved," Elena said, uncertainly. The nurse glanced at the monitor, still flat. "Elena, that's normal," the nurse replied gently. "Sometimes muscles move after death." But Elena wasn't convinced. She looked again at Daniel's face. Something deep inside her refused to believe he was gone. Dr. Harris had almost reached the door now. Elena looked at him, then back at Daniel. Hospital protocol was very strict. Once a doctor declared death, medical staff were not allowed to restart treatment without clear evidence. Breaking that rule could cause serious consequences: suspension, loss of license, career destruction. Elena swallowed nervously. Her mind raced with thoughts. What if she was wrong? What if it really was just a reflex? Everyone would think I was reckless. But another thought pushed into her mind. What if she was right? What if Daniel was still alive? What if everyone walked away while his heart was still fighting? Her chest tightened painfully. She imagined Daniel's mother outside the room, waiting, praying, hoping. Elena looked down at Daniel again. His fingers lay still now. His chest looked motionless. But her instincts screamed inside her. Something wasn't finished. Not yet. Her hands slowly curled into fists. She whispered under her breath, "I might be wrong." Her heart pounded harder. But what if I'm not? Her eyes filled with determination. At that moment, Elena made a decision that could change everything. She reached for the emergency button beside the bed. Her hand hovered over it. If she pressed it, the entire medical team would rush back. They would demand answers. And if nothing happened, her career could be over. Her hand trembled. For a few seconds she hesitated. The room felt silent and heavy. But then, suddenly, Daniel's finger moved again, a tiny twitch. But this time, Elena saw it clearly. Her eyes widened. That was not a reflex. That was life. Elena's fear disappeared instantly. Her voice burst out before she could stop it. "Code Blue!" she shouted urgently. Her hand slammed the emergency button. Alarms exploded through the emergency room. Red lights flashed. Footsteps thundered down the hallway. Doctors and nurses rushed toward the room. Dr. Harris turned around quickly. "What is going on?" he demanded. But Elena was already preparing the equipment again. Her heart raced with adrenaline. Her voice was steady now. "I think he's still alive," she said firmly. And in that moment, she had just broken the rules to save a life. The alarm echoed through the emergency department. Footsteps thundered down the hallway as doctors and nurses rushed toward the room. The doors burst open. Dr. Harris stormed inside first. "What is going on here?" he demanded loudly. His eyes moved quickly from the monitor to the patient and finally to Nurse Elena. The monitor still showed a flat line. Beep. Dr. Harris's face hardened. "You called a code blue?" he said slowly. Elena stood beside the bed, breathing heavily. "I saw movement," she said quickly. "He moved his finger. His chest moved too." Several nurses exchanged nervous glances. One of the younger nurses whispered under her breath, "Did anyone else see it?" No one answered. Dr. Harris stepped closer to the monitor and pointed at the flat line. "There is no cardiac activity," he said firmly. "But I saw it," Elena insisted. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. "I know what I saw." Dr. Harris rubbed his forehead in frustration. "Elena, the patient was declared dead 5 minutes ago," he replied, tired but firm. "You cannot restart treatment based on a guess." The room filled with heavy tension. Several nurses stood frozen, unsure what to do. But Elena refused to step back. She looked again at Daniel lying motionless on the bed. His face was pale, his lips slightly blue, but something inside her still whispered the same thing. He's still fighting. Elena grabbed the defibrillator pads from the nearby cart. "Charging the defibrillator," she said quickly. Dr. Harris's voice became sharp. "Elena, stop right now," he warned. She paused for just a second. The entire room waited. Her hands trembled slightly. "I saw him move," she said again, more quietly now. A senior nurse stepped forward. "Doctor, maybe we should check again," she suggested carefully. Dr. Harris looked around the room. Every eye was on him. If Elena was wrong, this would be a serious violation, but if she was right, he sighed heavily. "One attempt," he said finally. The room instantly shifted back into action. Elena placed the defibrillator pads on Daniel's chest. Her hands felt cold. "Charging to 200, she announced quickly. The machine hummed as energy built. Dr. Harris crossed his arms, watching carefully. Several nurses stepped back from the bed. The room grew quiet. Elena lifted the paddles. Her voice rang out loudly. "Clear!" Everyone stepped away. Elena pressed the paddles firmly against Daniel's chest. A powerful electric shock surged through his body. Daniel's body jolted violently. Then he fell still again. All eyes turned to the monitor. Flat. Beep. A nurse slowly shook her head. "No response," she murmured softly. Dr. Harris looked at Elena. "That's enough," he said coldly. The room began to quiet again. Some nurses lowered their heads, others began slowly stepping away, but Elena didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on Daniel's face. Her chest felt tight. "No," she whispered softly. Tears filled her eyes. She leaned closer to Daniel again. His skin felt cool, his chest still. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind. What if she had been wrong? What if she had imagined everything? Her voice trembled. "Daniel," she whispered again. The room had become silent once more. Dr. Harris turned away, preparing to leave, but Elena suddenly remembered something. Earlier in the evening, Daniel's mother had held his hand tightly before doctors rushed him into the emergency room. "Please tell him I'm here," she had cried. "He needs to know I'm here." Elena swallowed hard. She leaned closer to Daniel's ear. Her voice became soft but urgent. "Daniel, your mother is outside," she whispered. "She's waiting for you." The room remained silent. Nothing changed. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. Her tears fell onto the hospital sheet. "I know you're tired," she whispered softly, "but please don't stop fighting." The monitor continued its long, flat tone. Beep. Several nurses looked away sadly. Then, a small sound broke the silence. Beep. Everyone froze instantly. Elena's eyes snapped open. Did she imagine it? Then it happened again. Beep. The monitor flickered. Dr. Harris turned around sharply. "Wait," he said suddenly. Another beep followed. Beep, beep, beep. The straight line on the screen trembled. Then slowly, a heartbeat appeared. Beep, beep, beep. The room erupted with gasps. "Oh my God!" a nurse exclaimed. Another nurse rushed forward. "I'm getting a pulse," she shouted. Dr. Harris immediately stepped to the bedside. "Check carotid pulse," he ordered. A nurse placed 2 fingers on Daniel's neck. Her eyes widened. "I feel it," she cried. "He has a pulse." The room exploded into action again. Doctors rushed to prepare medications. Machines began monitoring vitals. The once silent room now buzzed with urgency. But Elena remained frozen beside the bed. Her hands covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She could barely breathe. Daniel's heart was beating. Alive. Dr. Harris stared at the monitor in disbelief. The rhythm slowly stabilized. He looked at Elena slowly. His voice was quiet now. "You were right," he said softly. Elena shook her head, still crying. I saw him move," she whispered. A nurse smiled through tears. "You saved him," she said gently. Doctors continued working to stabilize Daniel. Oxygen levels began improving. Blood pressure slowly returned.
Life was coming back. Minutes earlier, the room had accepted death. Now, it was witnessing a miracle. Dr. Harris watched the monitor carefully. Then he glanced at Elena again. There was no anger in his face now, only disbelief and respect. Because one nurse had trusted her instincts, and because she had broken the rules, a young man's heart was beating again.
Morning sunlight slowly filled the quiet hospital corridor. Soft golden light streamed through the tall windows, reflecting off the polished floors. The intense chaos from the night before had faded. Now the hospital felt calm again. Inside one room, a young man lay connected to several machines. Daniel Carter. His chest rose and fell slowly with the help of oxygen. The heart monitor beside his bed now produced a steady rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. Each sound felt like a miracle. A doctor carefully checked Daniel's vitals. "Heart rhythm stable," he said calmly. A nurse adjusted the IV drip beside the bed. "Blood pressure improving," she added, with professional confidence. Standing beside the bed was Daniel's mother. She had not left his side all night. Her eyes were red from hours of crying, but she held his hand tightly, as if letting go might cause him to disappear again. She gently brushed his hair back from his forehead. "My brave boy," she whispered softly, with tearful love. Daniel's fingers twitched slightly. His mother froze. Her eyes widened instantly. "Daniel?" she whispered, with a hopeful tremble. The doctor leaned closer. "Daniel, can you hear me?" he asked, with calm encouragement. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Daniel's eyelids began to move. His mother gasped loudly, with overwhelmed shock. "Oh my God!" she cried, with tears of joy. Daniel slowly opened his eyes. The bright hospital lights made him blink in confusion. His voice came out weak and dry. "Mom?" he murmured, with weak confusion. His mother immediately burst into tears. "I'm here! I'm right here!" she cried, with tears of relief. She leaned forward and hugged him carefully. Daniel looked around the room slowly. The machines, the doctors, the nurses. Everything felt blurry and distant. "What happened?" he whispered, with a weak voice. The doctor smiled gently. "You gave us quite a scare," he said, with reassuring calm. "But you're safe now." Daniel looked confused, but nodded slightly. The doctor turned toward the door. "Let's give them a moment," he told the nurses quietly, with respectful tone. They all began stepping out of the room. Standing quietly near the door was Nurse Elena. She had arrived early that morning, but hadn't entered the room yet. Part of her was afraid someone might remind her she had broken the rules, afraid the hospital administration might already be investigating what happened. But seeing Daniel awake made her chest fill with warmth. She turned to quietly leave, but suddenly Daniel's mother noticed her. Her eyes widened instantly. "You," she said suddenly, with emotional realization. Elena stopped and looked back nervously. Daniel's mother quickly walked toward her. Before Elena could speak, the woman grabbed her hands tightly. "You saved my son," she said with trembling emotion. Elena immediately shook her head. "No, I was just doing my job," she replied softly. But Daniel's mother began crying again. "No," she said with emotional certainty. "They told me what happened." Her voice trembled as she spoke. "They said everyone thought he was gone." Elena looked down quietly. "They said you were the only one who didn't give up." The words filled the hallway with silence. Several nurses nearby watched the moment quietly. Elena swallowed nervously. "I broke hospital protocol," she admitted softly, with a nervous confession. "I wasn't supposed to restart treatment." For a moment, Daniel's mother simply stared at her. Then suddenly she pulled Elena into a tight hug. "Thank you for breaking the rules," she whispered through tears. Elena's eyes filled with tears instantly.
She gently hugged the woman back. At that moment, another voice spoke from behind them. She didn't just break the rules. Everyone turned to see Dr. Harris standing there. His face was calm, but there was something different in his expression now. Respect. He stepped closer. She trusted her instincts, he said clearly, with proud acknowledgement. The nurses nearby nodded quietly. Dr. Harris looked directly at Elena. Medicine depends on knowledge, but sometimes it also depends on courage. Elena looked surprised. She expected criticism, maybe even punishment. Instead, Dr. Harris gave her a small nod. "You reminded all of us of something important last night," he said with sincere respect. "What was that?" a nurse asked softly, with curious tone. Dr. Harris glanced toward Daniel's room. Then he spoke quietly. "Machines show data, but sometimes the human heart knows something the machines cannot see." The hallway became quiet again. Daniel's mother wiped tears from her eyes. "You gave my son another chance at life," she said gently, with heartfelt gratitude. Elena could barely speak. Her voice trembled. "I just didn't want to give up on him," she whispered with emotional honesty. Later that evening, the hospital became quiet again. The long day was finally ending. Elena walked slowly through the hallway. Her shift was almost over. She stopped outside Daniel's room and looked through the glass window. Inside the room, Daniel sat up slightly in his bed. His mother was sitting beside him. They were talking softly. At one moment, Daniel laughed weakly, a quiet, tired laugh, but a real one. Elena smiled softly. Just 24 hours ago, that laugh almost never happened. She placed her hand gently against the glass. Her heart felt peaceful. Behind her, another nurse walked by. "You look happy," the nurse said warmly. Elena nodded slowly. "I am," she replied quietly. The nurse smiled. "Not many people get to say they saved a life." Elena looked back into the room again. Daniel and his mother were still talking, smiling together. She whispered softly to herself, "Sometimes the heart keeps fighting even when the world thinks it's finished." Then she turned and walked down the quiet hallway. Because that night proved something powerful. Rules are important in medicine. They protect lives. They guide decisions. But sometimes compassion, courage, and listening to your instincts can make the difference between life and death. And because one nurse refused to walk away, a young man was alive to see another sunrise.